Okay, so today's daf yomi is Sanhedrin 13, Sanhedrin Yun Gimel, and we're going to start on the bottom of 12b, 3 lines from the bottom. Today's daf yomi is dedicated for a shmirah for the chayalim, Hatzah for the shvuyim, and Yeshua for Am Yisrael and the Seis Tzara. The Gemara tells us, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. Rav Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, Ein me'aber nes hashana Elam kein haisa tekufa chasera ruba shachodesh. He says we only make a leap year if the tekufa is the season. As we said that there are 4 seasons, and here we're talking about, as Rashi explains it, tekufas Tammuz, which is the summer season, and so therefore, if the summer season is chasera, was didn't complete the rubo shachodesh tishrei. Basically, the kama rubo shachodesh shisha asar yom, meaning to say only if the summer season prevents the completion of the majority of the month of Tishrei in the Tekufas Tishrei, meaning if the summer equinox goes into the fall equinox, so much so that the full equinox is not going to take up the majority of the months of Tishrei. So therefore, if the court sees in the month of Adar that the summer season will extend 16 days into the month of Tishrei, and so therefore the season of Tishrei, the Tekufas Tishrei, what we would call fall, begins on the 17th day, then they should make a leap year and add a month so to extend it. But if the summer season does not get that delayed, it only goes in 15 days, and therefore the Tekufas Tishrei falls out on the 16th day, then we don't make a leap year as a consequence. That's the position of Rabbi Yehuda. Now, why wouldn't they just add 1 day? They could just make the previous month an extra day. That we don't do. Why don't we do that? The Gemara says we're not going to do. The Rashi explains we're not going to do that because it's actually easier to add a month than to add a day. And the reason why it's easier to add a month than a day is because we have very precise calendrical requirements for the holidays. Rosh Hashanah cannot be adu, lo adu Rosh. Rosh Hashanah cannot fall out on a Sunday, Wednesday, or Friday. And if we're going to switch around with the days, that could cause all sorts of problems. We don't want Rosh Hashanah we don't want Yom Kippur to be back to back with Shabbos, and we don't want Hoshana Rabbah to come out on a Shabbat. So rather than making the previous day a month more or less, we go in this manner. Gemara says, Rabbi Yossi Omer, Echad ve'esrim yom. Rabbi Yossi says, Rabbi Yossi says we only make the leap year if the Tekufas Tammuz took away 21 days from the month of Tishrei, and then the Tekufa of Tishrei falls out on day 22. But if it only took away 20 days from the month of Tishrei, then we don't make a leap year on that. So Rabbi Yehuda says 16 days, and Rabbi Yossi says 21 days. Ushneim mikra echadarshu, and both Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi are expounding the same verse, because it says in the pasuk Chag HaAsif, which we know as the holiday of Sukkot, the holiday of the ingathering, is Tekufas Hashana, has to be in the Tekufa, the season that begins the new year. So Chag HaAsif has to be in the Tekufa of Tishrei. Now, what Chag HaAsif, Rashi explains, refers to the holiday of the ingathering. But when do you gather? You gather in your dried out crops that are going to get ruined. You could gather them in only on Chol Moed, not on Yontif. So it means the Chol Moed has to be in the Tekufat Hashana, so in the new season. So Mar Savar Kule Chag Ba'inan B'Tekufa Chadasha. So Rabbi Yehuda is of the position that the entire Chol Moed needs to be in the autumnal the Tkufa of Tishrei. Umar Savar Mitzvahs Chag Ba'inan Tkufas Chadasha. Whereas Rabbi Yossi said the position you just need one day. The last day of the holiday of the Chol needs to be in the new Tkufa. So the Gemara first says, "My Kasavri." What do Rabbi Yehuda, and it's pretty obvious what they're saying now, but they're just fleshing it out, and you'll see why. There's going to be a later dispute. What do Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi, what's their position about the actual day in which the season happens? We know the season, it's not just waiting for us that the season, you wake up in the morning and say, okay, it's a new season, that there's a specific moment which is the season. It's a fraction. But the Gemara is talking about how do we view that whole day in which that season, in which there's a transfer of one season to the next season. Remember, we said that each Tekufa is 91 days and change. It's not exactly 91 days. So how do we view that last day, the moment where the season happens? Ikas Savri Yom Tekufa Gomar. Are we on the position that the day in which the Tekufa happens, we're viewing it as the last day of the previous Tekufa? So the day in which the season transfers from the summer Tekufa to the fall Tekufa, from the Tammuz to the Tishrei, if we view that as a day of Tammuz, if that's the case, even if the Tekufa's Tammuz is not missing 16 days, it's not taking away 16 days from the month of Tishrei, because even on day 15 it would be a problem. Even on day 15 it would be a problem. So because the last day is the last, obviously not according to Rabbi, basically according to Rabbi Yehuda, who says that all the days of Chol Moed need to fall in the new Tkufa. So then even if Tkufa's Tishrei falls out on the 16th day of the month of Tishrei, then we're still not going to say that all the days are going to be starting in the new Tekufa, because that day is going to be considered like the previous Tekufa. And the same thing with Rabbi Yossi. So it must be the Kasavar Yom Tekufa Malka. We have to say that the day of the new Tekufa, 16, is really beginning the new Tekufa of Tishrei. So the day the season changes is beginning the next Tekufa. That's just an obvious point that the Gemara is making, but it's really just setting up a couple of points now, which they're going to be going with. So what's the problem with that? Meisvei, because we are going to have a brisa, and the brisa will push out two contradictions. First of all, Yom Tekufa Gomer, Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. We just said Rabbi Yehuda says Yom Tekufa Maskil, that the day the season changes begins the next season. And here in the brisa, Rabbi Yehuda says that the day of the seasonal change is actually the previous season. So that's one contradiction. And Rabbi Yossi Omer Yom Tekufa Maskil. So it's not a contradiction with Rabbi Yossi, but it is a contradiction with Rabbi Yehuda. And furthermore, we have another brisa, V'otanya, Eima Abernes Hashana. We have another brisa which says we only make a leap year. Elam Kain Haisa Tekufa Chasera Ruba Shel Chodesh. That we only make a new leap year if the Tekufa was missing the majority of, if the Tekufa of Tammuz was cutting into the majority of the month of Tishrei, the Kama Ruba Shel Chodesh, Shisha Asar Yom, 16 days. That's the position of the Tanakama, which earlier we had associated with Rabbi Yehuda, that position of 16 days. And Rabbi Yehuda says, Shtei Yados. Here Rabbi Yehuda says 20, two, Shnei Yados means two portions, it means 20 days, 2/3. So we only make a leap year if it goes 20 days into the month of Tishrei. So now we have a contradiction, because we just said, we had earlier said, Rabbi Yehuda's position was if the Tekufa of Tammuz went 16 days into the month of Tishrei, and here he's saying if it went 20 days. The second contradiction, Rabbi Yehuda, that he said if it goes, that he had said Yom Tekufa is Matzil, and in the previous price he just said Yom Tekufa is Gomer. So we have two contradictions within Rabbi Yehuda's position. So now, yes, I'm sorry.
There are separate forensical experts who are deciding when to put up.
Yeah, they knew it had the Bezdin. The court was deciding that. They knew that. That's not the question of when it took place. We have to assume they knew when it's taking place. They knew when it's taking place. They're just deciding whether or not to make a leap year. So they knew, the experts. They knew they knew when the seasonal change was happening.
Expertise deciding how long it's the majority, it's 16 or 20. Why isn't that 12 expertise? What is that dispute? We're not disputing when the equinox is.
We're just deciding whether or not to make a leap year. And so that they're deciding at what point do you make a leap year if the entire this is not an astronomical question. The question is whether or not, if the seasons come out in this way, so that the majority of so that 16 days of the month of Tishrei comes out in the summer equinox, or 21 days according to Rabbi Yossi, then we have to make a leap year to determine that the calendar the Jewish calendar will still line up with the seasons come the holiday of Pesach. So it's not an astronomical question. Now it's a rabbinical question at that point. So they're looking at this in Adar because they declare the leap year in Adar. Once it's Av, it's too late to declare a leap year. We said that in the previous stuff. So the Gemara says, so again, we say in this brisa, which contradicts the earlier source, that the Tanna Kama says if it goes 16 days into the month of Tishrei, and Rabbi Yehuda says if it goes 20 days into the month of Tishrei, and Rabbi Yossi now gives a third position. Rabbi Yossi says, Mechashvin, we have to determine Shish Asor Lefnei Pesach Ma'abrin, that if the Tkufa of Teves, which is what we call the winter equinox, goes 16 days into the month of Nisan, and the Tkufa of Nisan, which is what we call the spring equinox, begins on the 17th day, then you should make a leap year, because according to this calculation, Tkufas Tishrei is going to then come out on the 22nd day of the month of Tishrei, which we'll see is contradicting Rabbi Yossi's position. But if it's 16 days prior to the festival, in which case it would come out on day 21 in the month of Tishrei, because it's only 16 days into the month of Nisan, and you counted 91 times 2, and you're going to get out on the 16th day of the month on the 21st day of the month of Tishrei, then you would not make a leap year. Rabbi Shimon says, Rabbi Shimon says also 16 days before Pesach, 16 days into Pesach, we make a leap year. Rabbi Shimon's position here seems to sound like Rabbi Yossi's position in the first source we cited, where it's day 21, you make a leap year. So it's a little bit of a mess. Acherim Omrim, and the Gemara is going to discuss it. Acherim Omrim, and now we have the position of the Acherim, and they say the Acherim throughout the Shas, by the way, we know throughout Shas, the Gemara in Harios, which we'll get to, God willing, and Bezos Hashem Yisparach tells us on Harios 13b, and wherever it says Acherim in Shas refers to Rabbi Meir, that they penalize him because of an incident in Harios, that they don't call him by his name, they just call him Acherim. Remember, Rabbi Meir was a student of Elisha ben Avua, who they called Acher. Anyway, Acherim said, even if it's only missing miuto, even if you're just taking away a minority of the month, we're going to declare a leap year. V'kama miuto, what is the minority of the month that you would declare a leap year? Arba Yom, 14 days. So the Gemara says, we see from our brisa that according to Rabbi Yehuda, we have two contradictions. First of all, he says that even if it's just a portion, here it says 16, and also he said in our source he says at Kufa Gomer. In the earlier source we said Yom at Kufa Mastil. So kasha, we have a difficulty with Shmuel's the source that Shmuel cited at the beginning. We have contradiction in the two braysos. So Amar Marsh. Now we're going to analyze these. We're going to analyze these braysos. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Shtei Yodas B'Chodesh is Esrem Yom. That the two that we make a leap year when the Tkufa of Tammuz goes 20 days into the month of Tishrei. Rabbi Yossi says Mechashvin Shisha Asar Yom Lefnei Pesach Ma'abrin. Rabbi Yossi says, no, we calculate. If it was 16 days before Pesach, then we make a leap year, because then it would go to 21 days. But if it was 20 days, basically, Rabbi Yehuda says if it was 20 days in the month of Tishrei, that's when we make a leap year. Rabbi Yossi says if it delayed 16 days before Pesach, then we make a leap year, because then we see that Kufas Tammuz is going to go until the 21st day of Tishrei. Hainu Rabbi Yehuda. So isn't this the same thing of Rabbi Yehuda? Because according to them, they're basically saying, remember we had analyzed the position, as long as there's a portion, Rabbi Yossi says, as long as a portion of Chol Moed comes out in the Tekufa of you just need a portion of Chol Moed to come out in order to make it a leap year. And so then they're both saying that you just need a portion of Chol Moed. As long as there's a portion of Chol Moed coming out, you don't make it a leap year. And that's what they're basically saying here as well. So the Gemara says, no, the distinction between them is Yom Tekufa Gomer, Yom Tekufa Maskil, Ikabana. The distinction between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda here is the actual day of the equinox. They're arguing about whether the actual day of the equinox is going to be viewed as the conclusion of the previous tekufa or the beginning of the next tekufa. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it's going to be viewed as the conclusion of the previous tekufa. And so therefore, if the tekufa falls out on the 21st day of the month of Tishrei, then we're going to make a leap year, because none of the holiday, there's not even one day of Chol Moed in the new tekufa. But according to Rabbi Yossi, we're going to view it as the new tekufa. And so therefore, if the 21st day of the month comes out in the Chol Moed, then we're not going to make a leap year. Next part, it says, Amar Marsh, it says in the Brisa, according to Rabbi Yossi, Shisha Asar Fnei Achag, if the winter equinox goes 16 days into the month of Nisan, we don't make a leap year. So if that's the case, Rabbi Yossi, Shisha Asar Fnei Achag, Hu, if it's 16 days into the month of Av, we don't make a leap year. Shivsar V'Timnasar Ba'abrin, which means to say, but if it goes 17 days or 18 days into the month of 17 days or 18 days into the month of Pesach, we will make a leap year. Amar Shisha of Nea Pasach in Batir Lo, but he said that only if it goes 16 days into the month of Nisan Ma'ab, we make a leap year, because then Tisha will come out on day 22. But less than that, we don't make a leap year. Meaning to say, if Tekufa of Tammuz goes until the 20th day, we don't make the leap year. So why do you say only 16 days before the Chag we make a leap year? So the Gemara says, well, in both cases, even if the Kufa of Tishrei goes until 17 or 18 days, we don't make a leap year. But I did Tani Reisha Shisha of Nea Pesach, because he started by saying 16 days before Pesach, which would come out to 21 days in the month of Tishrei. So therefore, he also uses Tananami Shisha Asraf Neachag, 16 days before Sukkot. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Af Shisha Asraf Neachag Ma'abran. He says also 16 days. If it goes 16 days into the month of Tishrei, then we're going to make a leap year. So Hainu Tanakama, if that's the case, it's the same position of Tanakama, that if it's missing 16 days from the month, we make a leap year. This was the original position of Rabbi Yehuda we saw in the first brisa, and it's the same position as Tanakama, and Ethan's saying the same position as Rabbi Shimon. So what's the distinction? We're on the top of Yud Gimel on the base. The Gemara says, Iga Benayu Yom Tekufa Maskil V'Yom Tekufa Gomer. Now the distinction between them is whether or not the Yom Tekufa, the day of the season passing, is going to be considered the first day of the new season or the last day of the previous season. According to one of them, the day in which the Tekufa comes, that's going to be from the new Tekufa. And so therefore, we only make a leap year if it falls out on 16th day of the month. We wouldn't make a leap year if it falls out on the 16th day of the month, because all of the days of the Tekufa, all the days of Chol Moed are in the new Tekufa. And so, whereas according to the one who argues, if it's the last day, and so therefore, if the Tekufa falls out on the 16th day of the month, we have to make a leap year, because the 16th day itself is going to be considered like the previous Tekufa. We don't know who says what.
Who holds that all of Chol Moed has to be
the position about 16 days of the month, and that position is attributed to 4 different authorities here through the different prices. And the first price was Rabbi Yehuda, then this whole of Chol Moed, yeah. The Acher the position that you should make a leap year even if it's only missing miuta. a minority of the months of Tishrei is contained within the summer equinox, you still have to make a leap year. But so according to this position, even if only 14 days of the month of Tishrei are contained in the summer X season, you still have to make a leap year. So what's their position here? It doesn't make sense. Even if they say that the last day of the Tekufa is considered part of the previous Tekufa, you still have the entire Chol Moed. Gemara says, "Amar Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak, Acherim betkufas Nisan kaimi." No, the Acherim are talking about with the season of the spring. That's what they're talking about. The Ksiv Shamoris Chodesh Aviv. It says about the holiday of Aviv. Shamor Aviv Shal Tekufa. You have to watch the Aviv, which here refers to the Tkufas Nisan, Sheba Chodesh Nisan. That has to be, here Chodesh doesn't mean the new month, it means while the month is still growing. And so therefore the Shamoris Chodesh Aviv, that the Tkuf of Nisan has to come while it's still within the time where it is, where the month is still growing, which is up to the 14th day of the month. So we say if the Tkufa of Chodesh Nisan, if the Tkufa comes on the 15th day of Nisan, then we're not going to fulfill this idea of Chodesh Aviv, because the Chodesh Aviv, the Aviv does not come in the time of the Chidush HaLavana. And so therefore you would make a leap year. So the Gemara says, Adar. So why don't we just make, why do you need to make a leap year? Why don't we just say Adar? Why don't you just add 1 day to the month of Adar? And so, and then you wouldn't have this problem. So he says, no, the Tana Vacherim who says 14 days is because he's at the position with he's counting the number of days from the end of the month to the beginning of the month. And this is what he's saying. If you're going to be missing from the month of Teves 18 days or 17 days, if you're going to be missing from the season of Teves into the month of Nisan, 18 days or 17 days or 16 days or 15 days, ad miuto, until the minority of the month me'abrin. Until the minority of the month you make a leap year. V'kama miuto, arba asar yom. Mean to say, if the season comes, the tkufa comes on the 16th day of the month, then you need to make a leap year for the whole year. But if it's only missing 14 days from the month and it comes on the 15th day, then you don't have to make a leap year for the whole year. You just add on an extra day to the month of Adar. Okay, last opinion here is Ravina says, "Olam acherim b'tishrei kaimi." No, the acherim are not referring to the tkufa of Nisan, but rather referring to the tkufa of Tishrei, and they have a different opinion. Kasabri, they're of the position acherim kuechag ba'inon v'yom tov rishon. They say they don't need the whole Chol Moed. They need the whole festival. Even the first day of the Yontif needs to be in the autumnal season, the autumn season. And so therefore, that's why they said even up until day 15. And so therefore, if the Tkufa comes out on the 15th day of the month, then the first day of the holiday, since the first day, because they're on the position Yom Tkufa Gomer, that the first day of the Tkufa is really the last day of the previous season, therefore it's not going to work. And so therefore it needs to be, if it goes beyond 14, we're going to have a problem. Yom Tov Rishon, so the Gemara says, why would he say you need the first day? Chag HaSivksiv isn't the holiday of the ingathering, and therefore it's not going to apply under those circumstances. Chol Moed, why do you need the first day of Chag? It's only Chol Moed, which is the holiday of the gathering in of the crops. So he says, no, it means Chag Haba B'zman HaSifra, the holiday that comes in with the time of the gathering. Anyway, it's in because Rashi says, because that's the time where you can actually gather in the crops, and on Yontif you can't gather in the crops. So okay, so now anyway, that's that piece. It's not conceptually hard if you just need a calendar in front of you, and then you'll see it all laid out. I don't know. Yeah. So it's okay. Yeah. I know you go over a couple of times, it'll be sharper. But the basic point is, Rabbi Yehuda changes. There's two different versions of Rabbi Yehuda, which Gemara says is difficult. But the basic point is that they want to make sure that the seasons here pass Hobbs. You need tissue Hobbs. And they want to make that the basic. What everyone needs to remember is that Judaism is not just a lunar calendar, and it's not just a solar calendar. It's a luni-solar calendar, and we want to make sure that the calendars, that the Hebrew months line up with the seasons, or else we have a problem. So we have to constantly be adjusting it and tweaking it. So now the Mishnah says smichas sekenim is bishlosha. The laying of the hands of the elders is with 3. That's position of Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yehuda says b'chamisha. Rabbi Yehuda says it's 5. So Tana Rabbanan. So the rabbis taught in the Brisa. It says, when do the elders place their hands? They place it on the communal offering if the community committed a sin accidentally. So it says in Parashas Vayikra, the elders of the community have to place their hands on the head of the bull. The Samchu Ziknei Yisrael. So who is this referring to? The elders place their hands. Yachol Ziknei Ashuk. I might think that this refers to the elders of the marketplace, meaning the Torah scholars who are not sitting in the Sanhedrin. You just get any elders could do it. Talmud Omar Eidah. No, it says it has to be specifically the Sanhedrin. Eidah refers to the Sanhedrin. And Eidah Yachol Katane Haida. I might think, well, maybe it's just a court of 23. Talmud Omar Ha'eidah. Miuchadin Shebeheidah. The Sanhedrin has to do it. The Kamahin. So you need 3. So you need the elders of the Sanhedrin to place their hands on their bowl. How many elders? So it says V'samchu Ishnayim and Ziknei Ishnayim and Ein Beis Shakol Mosifo Ein Odechad Arei Kan Chamisha. So there you have the position of Rabbi Yehuda. Different Rabbi Yehuda says you need 5 because it says V'samchu and Ziknei is 2 and 2. That's plural, so that's 4. And then you can't have an even court. That's 5. Whereas Rabbi Shimon says Shnayim, Ziknei Ishnayim. The elders are 2 and Ein Beis Shakol. He says the elders are 2 and you can't have an even court, so you add on 1 and then you get to 3. So he doesn't quote V'samchu. Or Rabbi Shimon, V'samchu. What does he do with the fact that it says V'samchu? He ignores that. So he says, no, Gufa. That's teaching us that they actually have to put their hands on. You need that for the context itself. You can't just use that as a drasha. Rabbi Yehuda doesn't use that to teach us he doesn't need it for the context. The lo asi v'samchu drasha, because if it wouldn't be the case, so he says that Rabbi Yehuda says, of course you don't need this. Of course you need the samchu is for a drasha, because otherwise it could have just written, and the elders of the Sanhedrin would place ziknei eda yideim al par without the word v'samchu. And we would know that they have to place their hands there. So therefore, it's for a drasha. Rabbi Shimon I might have said there that they put their hands next to the bowl, but not on the bowl. Rabbi Yehuda says no. We would know it needs to be on the bowl because it says the word here rosh, and it says the word rosh by an olah. It says the samach yado al rosh olah, gamar rosh me olah, and just like there, it's actually on the ola animal, so to here also. Rabbi Shimon will gamar rosh me'ol. He doesn't learn that out. So the Gemara says, well, now let's learn about smicha of the chachamim. Tana, smicha sekenim b'shlosha. The smicha, which we'll see is ordination to be called a rabbi, and smicha sekenim, and that is the placing of the hands on the bowl in the communal offering. That is, they require 3 men for that job. It needs to be, in order to have that authority to do it, you need a court of 3 to declare you worthy. My smicha sekenim. What is this? I'm Rabbi Yochanan. Smicha is mismach sabi. This is the smicha of the sages, that they're now going to all call you from now on smicha, but they're calling you Rebbe. And this requires a court of three. The Rambam writes in Sanhedrin chapter 4, halacha aleph, this, he describes this. Echad Beis Din Agadol v'Echad Sanhedrin Katana, whether it's the high court or the small court, the court of 71, or the small court, O Beis Din shall shlosha, or a court of three, one of them needs to be samach mipiyat samach. They need to have this ordination, a chain of tradition, going back to Moshe. Moshe Rabbeinu ordained Joshua with his hands. It says, and also the 70 elders, Moshe Rabbeinu ordained them with his hands and put the divine presence upon them. And those elders ordained others, and others to others. And so therefore, those who have this ordination going back to the time of Joshua until his court of Moshe. And so that's what originally it was, but we lost that. The Gemara is going to discuss how the Romans destroyed that process. How do we know that you need 3 sages to anoint somebody and to ordain them, to call them rabbi? If it comes from Moshe putting his hands on Joshua and he placed his hands upon him, that was one. If you want to say Moshe was the equivalent of 71 judges of the Sanhedrin, so then you should require 71. So why do you get 3? You should require either 1 or 71. Kasha. So or Ravashi, do you actually have to stick your hands on him? Or maybe he says it not as a question. He said, or he's asking, he actually doesn't say it as a question. He says, biyada mamish something like that. But he seems to be asking it as a question because of the response. It says you actually have to stick your hands on the person when you ordain him as a rabbi. Amroi Ravashi says no. No, you don't actually put your hands upon him. You just ordain him with the name. Karuwe Rebbe. You call him Rebbe. And that's what the Rambam writes. Kate said he smicho adoros. Future generations, what do? You don't stick your hands on the head of the elder. You just call him Rebbe. And you say, now you have the ordination and you have the permission to judge even matters of punitive damages. And as the Gemara says, you now have your permission to adjudicate matters of dine mamanos, of fines, not just dine mamanos, of fines. So v'chad lo samach, if it's one person, he's not allowed to give the ordination. V'amar Rav Yehuda Marav, varam zachar oso l'shalatov, Yehuda ben Babashmo, shemalehu nishtachu dine knaso shebi Yisrael. So, okay, this is a powerful story. It's really, it is one of the most powerful stories, but it's tomorrow's daf. I mean, I'll read it now if you want to stay, but it's tomorrow's daf. But